you just mentioned Putin, though, and this
Yeah.
has been this controversy of the past week. Can you say yes or no whether you have talked to Vladimir Putin since you stopped being president?
Well, I don't comment on that, but I will tell you that if I did, it's a smart thing. If I'm friendly with people, if I have a relationship with people, that's a good thing, not a bad thing, in terms of a country. He's got 2,000 nuclear weapons, and so do we. China has a lot less, but they'll catch us within 5 years.
That sounds very
If I
much
have a
like,
relationship, I don't talk about. I don't talk about. No, I don't talk about that.
I don't
ever say it. But I can tell you what, Russia has never had a president that they respect so much.
Let's go to former Defense Secretary Mark Esper. Secretary, thanks so much for sharing part of your afternoon with us. What did you think of what you just heard from Donald Trump? Because aside from the economic questions, he talked a lot about foreign policy.
Yeah, I only caught a few minutes of it. It was, look, a very honest conversation. I think Trump was being Trump. He was speaking to the issues. I thought the moderator was doing a good job in terms of pressing him on the specific questions he was asking, and then trying to argue the counterpoint, particularly when it came to tariffs and the inflationary effects and other impacts it would have. So a good discussion. I know you brought up, Boris, a question about whether Trump has been talking with Putin. Look, I think in general, world leaders talk to one another once they leave office. Friendships develop. What's unusual in this case would be that Trump is talking to Vladimir Putin, who is arguably our adversary. I mean, what he's doing around the world in terms of his horrific onslaught against Ukraine now for over 2.5 years, the cyber operations he's conducting against the United States and our allies. He's an adversary. So that raises major questions, which Bob Woodward, apparently in his latest book, said that Putin and Trump continue a dialogue. And so it'd be very interesting to know, what are they really talking about? So that kind of piqued my curiosity, of course.
Yet reporting that he may have talked to Putin as many as 7 times since leaving office. What are your concerns about what they may be talking about? Where do you see the line, and where do you have concerns about that line?
Well, it's all speculation, of course, but the question would be is to what degree is he trying to advise Vladimir Putin in terms of how to deal with the Biden administration in the United States, or is he promising certain things if he comes back into office one day? Those would be major issues, major concerns of mine. But again, we just don't know. It's worth saying again, it's not unusual for world leaders to maintain friendships, relationships beyond their terms in office. What's unusual again is this is Vladimir Putin. He's an adversary. He's doing things to harm the United States and our allies, and what he's doing against Ukraine is just terrible. So this is why my concern is particularly piqued here.
Secretary, I have one more question for you. If you have a moment, I know you're running short on time, but it was a question that was asked that I thought illuminated Trump's worldview more broadly. The moderator was asking him about how the U.S. won the Cold War against the USSR, and it had to do with uniting allies. He was asking Trump about his approach in alienating folks that are supposed to be your friends on the world stage through the threat of tariffs, through some of his rhetoric, and whether he thought that would ultimately cost the United States in what he views as a current Cold War with China. I wonder what you make of that approach and that statement from Trump.
Sure. Look, it's a great question, and it's a terrific issue. Look, I'm a Reagan Republican, and what Ronald Reagan did was rally the West, and he led. And what Reagan did during the 80s, along with Margaret Thatcher and others, was to basically defeat the Soviet Union through soft power and pushing back here and there. But we did it with allies and partners. And in today's context, the 21st century, where I see China as our greatest strategic adversary, followed by Russia, Iran, North Korea, we have a great lineup of allies: the Europeans, the Japanese, Australians, Filipinos. You go around the world, we have dozens of treaty allies and even more partners. The other side, the China team, the Russia team, what they have are the 4 of them plus Nicaragua and Mali. It's not a very good team. So it's important that we kind of keep the big picture in focus. That means democracy has to win here in the 21st century, and we're only going to do that if we, the democracies of the world, our allies and partners, work together. And what that means is making sure that we don't do things unnecessarily to fracture that alliance, to fracture those partnerships. And that would be my concern when we talk about 100% tariffs across the board or breaking up trade agreements, things like that. Look, it's fair to look at those things. It's fair to assess trade agreements to make sure they're current with the times, that they're meeting our interests. That's fine. But to threaten those things and possibly fracture these important alliances and partnerships in this standoff we're now against the autocracies of the world, I think is what concerns me.
Yeah, he said allies are taking more advantage of the U.S. than their enemies. Secretary Esper, great to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you both.
And let's go to Kristen Holmes now, who has been tracking this event. Kristen, a really interesting event so far, certainly one where former President Trump is getting very much challenged on his economic plans. And we heard John Micklethwait there saying that, you know, being, I think, critical of some of Trump's economic plans. Trump trying to turn the tables on him, saying, what do you know? Bloomberg is wrong. The Wall Street Journal is wrong. Micklethwait trying to say, look, a lot of economic experts, which is true, have concerns about your plans. And they do. They're very concerned about the inflationary effects of what Trump has in store.
That's right, Brianna, and this is really the first time we've heard somebody be able to challenge Trump on these tariffs. Generally speaking, when he is in an interview with a more friendly environment or a more friendly moderator, they let him speak and then that's it. And generally, if we shout out as the press corps in a press conference a question about this, he can choose if he wants to answer it or not. And he's not answering questions about a follow-up on tariffs. This was the first time we've actually seen him have to answer questions about those economists, about the fact that the Wall Street Journal, that Bloomberg have all said that this could lead to massive inflation, this kind of tariffs. One of the most interesting points that was made by the Bloomberg editor-in-chief was something that Donald Trump often does. He pointed out the fact that Donald Trump was talking about singular events, saying, okay, I'm asking you about your tariff plan as a whole, but you're bringing up one-offs like John Deere moving. Okay, so you stop them from moving with the threat of tariffs, but we're talking about what tariffs would do to the overall country, to the overall ecosystem of the economy if you were to actually implement them in the way that you want to. Now, Donald Trump is doing what Donald Trump does, and he himself called it the weave, which is really going off into separate stories about when he was in office or conversations that he had and getting away from the topic at hand. But for his part, that editor-in-chief is pushing Donald Trump on the issue of tariffs. Now, when it comes to Putin, it was interesting also. This is the first time Donald Trump has been able to be asked about whether or not he has spoken to Putin since he's been out of office. Obviously, he dodged that question multiple times, but did sort of leave the door open. It sounded as though he had, in fact, talked to Putin. Now, I will say when the editor-in-chief made the same point that I just did, he said, that's not what I said. I just didn't answer your question on that. But one thing to keep in mind here is that it's not as though this would exist in a vacuum of did he talk to Putin or not. I mean, this is a presidential candidate who has spent much of his time on the campaign trail praising Vladimir Putin, saying that they had a really strong relationship, saying how smart Vladimir Putin was, even in the context of Ukraine and what is going on with the Ukraine war, talking about how he has a good relationship with Vladimir Putin, and now after his meeting with Zelensky, he has a good relationship with Zelensky, so he could be the one who got something done on this front, again, without any real details as to what exactly a negotiation would look like, another thing that he hasn't answered questions on. But I will say, just in this very conversation, this is the setting where you have one topic going on about the economy where Donald Trump can actually be pressed, where it's harder for him to bob and weave and move to other topics. So we saw him really, we saw the head of Bloomberg there really trying to get some answers from Trump on the economy, particularly as we have heard this enormous amount of pushback really across the spectrum on what tariffs would do overall for the economy.